And welcome to everyone. Today, our legendary guest today is Chris Lytle, the former UFC fighter, and it's a great honor to have you in the studio, Chris. So, what can you say in general about your achievements? Like you fought in UFC, you fought in bare knuckle. There is no promotion where you haven't participated. So, what can you say in general? Like 4 or 5 sentences. I know your career has been very, very long, but like 3, 4 most important things.
I'm just happy to have been at a time when the sport was still up and coming and new, and you had a different style of fighter back then. I think you had people who were maybe not quite as athletic, but I think they had like a really hard. The guys there were all true fighters. It was a good time to be there. It was just when the sport was still growing. It was very interesting. I think it's a lot like the bare knuckle right now. I do that, and after the fights, everybody will be in the same place hanging out, and I'll tell them it's not going to be like this in 10 years. People will be out their own little after party and everything. It's just kind of a neat little thing when the sport is growing up. And like I said, it was neat being part of the UFC when it was not big, and not a lot of people were into it or even knew what you were talking about, and they looked at you very weird when you said you fought in a cage. That's not like that anymore, but it was a very fun time to be involved with that sport.
Yeah, it was really much a great time. Many people asked me about your fighting style. I know your punches were great. I knew your submission game was outstanding. You had some pretty much impossible submissions for that time. But what was your first martial art? I mean, did you have a fundamental martial art or you were pure MMA?
No, I was a wrestler. I wrestled in high school and a little bit in college. So I was a ground guy at the beginning, and I started off and I came in. I was very good at submitting people, and then very early into my career, I decided my stand-up was not very good, and I needed to work on my boxing. So then I went to a professional boxing gym and started boxing. And I really enjoyed it. So then I began professional boxing quite a bit as well. So then, by the time I really made it to the UFC, they looked at me as a professional boxer, which helped me because it gave me a lot of easier submissions. People would shoot in on me, or I would hit somebody and hurt them, and it would lead to an easy submission. So I think they overlooked my ground game because they looked at me as a boxer.
Honestly, in the first place, I was having a hard time pronouncing your last name, so I knew you as Lights Out. But can you please explain the origin of the name? Was it about the knockout power, or?
Yeah, well, I got that in my first professional boxing match. I was brought in pretty much to lose. They thought I was going to lose the fight, and they brought me into to fight a guy in his hometown. And at the end, they called it a draw. I thought I won. They thought I won, but the guy who put on the fight, he was the guy from Top Rank Boxing. He was like, man, I thought you were going to lose. You did well. But he's like, you hit this guy really hard. And he asked me what my name was. And I told him my name was Chris Lytle. And he said, Lytle, I'm going to call you Lights Out Lytle because you're going to knock out a lot of people. So I was like, there it is. You don't give yourself a nickname. Somebody else has to give you it. And he gave me my nickname. So it was my first professional boxing match, and it came from me hitting people hard.
Where were you training back then? Which was your gym?
I trained in Indianapolis in something called integrated fighting.
Yeah, that were pretty much great days. I watched some of your boxing fights, but you had like many fights. Who was your toughest boxing opponent and why?
I fought a guy named Omar Pittman, and he was very tough. He was a guy from Philadelphia with a very great boxing city. And I was once again brought in to lose to this guy, and he knocked me down earlier in the fight, but I ended up just sticking with it and turned it into a tough fight and knocked him out in the 7th round. So I think he was my toughest. I saw him fight afterwards on TV a couple times. I know he fought that Jean Pascal and almost knocked him out at one point. So he was a very tough boxer, but I felt good to get a win over him. He was a tough guy.
I know this was a very long time ago, but what can you say about your first MMA fight? But like first MMA, not UFC, like it was 22 years ago. Haven't watched it though. I was unable to find a link, but.
Yeah, that was back in 1998. Yeah, I don't even know if the internet was brand new. So, man, it was a different world back then. I went and it was in this old like karate studio in the basement, and it was real dark and kind of like they had like hold the cage together. It was unreal how different it was. I mean, it was something like from the movie Fight Club. You were in some basement and there was a cage there, and it was man, there was very few rules. I mean, when I first started fighting, I remember in certain places you could still headbutt. You could kick to a guy in the head on the ground. You could knee a guy in the head on the ground. So there was I mean, my first fight was, about 5 years after the very first UFC. So it was still very early into the sport.
What do you say about Pancrase as a promotion?
Ooh. Pancrase was fantastic, man. I mean, when I first started fighting, I knew the UFC was UFC, but I really wanted to be part of Pancrase. That's where, if you really look into it, a lot of the great UFC fighters came from. You had the Ken Shamrocks, Frank Shamrock, Guy Metzger, Boss Rutan. You had a lot of the greats, and they were there. So I knew that they were, in my opinion, ahead of the game in the UFC. Those guys have been already doing that type of fighting for a while. It's a little different, not quite as brutal. It was more skill involved in Pancrase. I think it was more about the submission and whatnot, and not as much about knocking people out. But very good promotion. They took care of their fighters very well, and it was just it was a pretty big honor to go there, because when they treated it like a real sport. When I'd go to Japan, they'd have playing card, like baseball cards for me, and people would come up and have me sign them, and they'd have real interviews. I mean, even when I fought for the UFC the first time, it wasn't quite like that. So I really loved the Pancrase organization. They taught me a lot about what kind of fighter I wanted to be, and how to carry myself, how to act.
Pancrase maybe have a different set of rules. I mean, I watched your fight against Ikuhisa Minova. It ended in a draw. To me, I watched few Pancrase fights. I was more a die-hard fan of Pride. So Pancrase was having some kind of a different rules, or?
Yeah. Well, when I was there, Pancrase, they were trying to transition into more of a MMA, because at first, so some of the times I'd fight there and they'd have one set of rules where you wore the big boots and you couldn't use closed-fisted punches to the face, open-handed strikes to the face, and closed-fisted to the body. But that was more about technique. Then they were doing the other kind where you could headbutt and you could throw knees anywhere. They were trying to get more into MMA. I was a huge fan of Pride myself. I really loved the Pride rules, and more importantly, I love the Pride judging, the way they scored fights. I think it was more about someone trying to finish the fight the entire time, not about controlling the pace. And a lot of times in UFC, a guy would just try and get a takedown and hold you down or something. They really pushed the action in Pride, and I really enjoyed that.
What can you say about your UFC debut? That's question one. And question two, do you have favorite strike and submission? When I was watching you, there were so many different submissions, and all of them you finish majority of opponents via very much different submissions.
Yeah. As far as my favorite punch, I feel like one of my favorite things to do is that double jab and that hard right hand to the body. I felt like always trying to take people's wind and make them tired and make it an easier fight for me. And if you've ever ended a fight with a body punch, it's a pretty good feeling. So I always like to learn that right hand of the body. As far as submissions, I work a lot of different areas, a lot of awkward style. Like, I was never really a jiu-jitsu guy. I think a jiu-jitsu guy, when I go against them, I know exactly what they're going to do. My goal is always just to try and find one opening and one weakness and take whatever submission I could get. So I remember when I had one of my UFCs, I had a rolling knee bar. I really enjoyed that. I really was a fan of doing guillotines, one-arm guillotine. But I had one that I won in two different UFCs. It was like a double submission. It was like a reverse triangle choke / arm bar, and that's really good because I've hit that with people in the gym many times, and sometimes I get the reverse triangle choke, and sometimes I get the arm bar. I don't really care as long as they tap out. That's all that matters.
Yeah, true. You fought Nick Diaz So what do you think about Nick Diaz as the opponent? People say that Nick Diaz never guesses. Is it true or not?
Well, I'll tell you what, he didn't gas on me, and unfortunately, I remember when I fought him, I didn't know who he was. He was a young kid. He's like 20 years old. I'd already fought in UFC, so I was a little arrogant going into the fight because he wasn't supposed to be my opponent. He was a last-minute replacement. I think I'm fighting this young kid, and I remember it was in California. It was extremely hot that day. It was probably 100 degrees. So by the time I fought him, it was probably 85 or 90. We're outside, and I mean, man, I got tired about halfway through about the end of the second round. I was tired. So the third round, I think we're tied at 1 round apiece. I'm tired. I took him down, and I'm just trying to hold him down, and they stood us up, and remember, he hit me and cut me open, and I pulled guard and just sat there the rest of the fight. I had to lose in a split decision, but he had a lot more energy than I did, and I was in pretty good shape back then, and it just wore me out, the heat and the pace. So he definitely comes at a good pace, and he just trains different. I think he's into a lot of marathons and triathlon type things. So he's got a lot of that slow twitch muscle fibers, and he can just continue to put out a lot of work for a long period of time.
When I watched your fight against Robbie Lawler back then, I was a kid back then, but it was one of the best fights of the year. I believe it was 23, right? 2003.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah, it was one of the best fights for me, really. It was very entertaining all the time. So what do you think about that fight?
Well, thank you, first of all. Second of all, I really, it's hard to really love the fight, even though it was a loss, but I do. I lost a decision there, but that really changed the way people looked at me, because going into that fight, I know everybody that I looked at said that, Robbie Lawler is going to knock this guy out. It's not going to be close, so probably over and around. And I was like, okay, these guys, I've never been knocked out. They think this guy's going to knock me out. It ain't happening like that. So, we went in there, we put on a very good fight. I think it was, definitely one of the best fights of that night. And, that was one of those fights where you kind of forget the crowd's there. You forget you're on TV. You just kind of fall in love with the moment. And only thing that mattered in the world was me and him fighting. I didn't really notice anything else. So I'm hitting him, and he's clapping, and then I'm clapping, and we're like, all right, let's do this. I want to see who's tougher. I think you're not going to hurt me, and I think I can hurt you. And he thought the same thing. And when you get two guys who think that, you usually have a great fight. And that's what we did. We put on a great fight. And, I still look back and really know that that's what got people to look at me differently. That's what got people to know that I was a legitimate fighter and I was there to stay.
About Tiki Gossen fight, you finished him via Bulldog Choke. Bulldog Choke was pretty much unknown technique back then. At least in my state, it was pretty much unknown. So what was the key for that Bulldog Choke?
Well, I'd hit it in practice, but, I wasn't really trying to hit that move. I was trying to take his back, and he get side mount on him, and he rolled over. And as he did that, my arm kind of fell in position. I was like, okay, I remember I've done this before. All I have to do is hurry up and lock this in before he can get his chin down. So as soon as he locked it in there, I got it locked in. I knew all I had to do was grab my hand and squeeze really hard. And once it's locked in, there's no way getting out. It's one of those sneaky moves that I think it looks pretty simple. It's once you get caught in a couple of times, I think you don't get caught in it again, because you got to tuck that chin down. But as soon as I got it underneath there, I was like, this is over. I knew I just had to squeeze as hard as I could. It was funny. I saw that once before when Pat Miletich got beat by Carlos Newton. And I saw Pat Miletich that night. He came up and he was like, hey, man, I heard you won. How'd it go? And I was like, great. I caught him in a choke. And he said, what? And he goes, you were going to say the same move I got caught in by Carlos Newton, weren't you? I go, yeah. And it was just funny. We both laughed. So that's about the only time I'd seen it before that. And but I practiced it in the gym when I'd get people in that position, and they weren't really used to it. I think people are used to it now.
Who was the most difficult UFC opponent for you?
Ooh, that's tough. I fought a lot of tough guys there. I would probably say, I fought Matt Hughes right when he came off. He'd won like I don't know, 8 in a row or something, and he just got beat by George St. Pierre. So right after he lost that fight, I fought him, and I was really wanting to make a statement. I wanted to go out there and try and knock him out, and because they were talking about how he's been practicing stand-up a lot. I was like, not a chance he's going to want to stand up with me. And I went out there to really try and knock his head off, and he took me down and tried to hold me down the entire time. I could tell he wanted to get back to that title shot with St. Pierre, so he was in no way going to try and open up and actually trade punches with me. So he was just really good at countering everything. I mean, he was obviously very strong and he's tough and he's a good wrestler, but I was impressed with his ability when I had him in a couple really good chokes, and I had a guillotine, and all he did was hold my left leg down. So I knew I couldn't get that left leg over his back to separate his head from his body, so I couldn't finish him. So he did the one thing he had to. He stopped that submission in a very smart way. So he just held it there for about 30 seconds and let my arms get a little tired, and then he moved on. I let go. So it was very tough because he was very smart. He was very strong, and he had one thing in mind, and that's win at all costs. So when you fight someone like that, it's tough to put on a fight, and it's tough to put on an entertaining fight. It's hard just to survive.
How did you finish Matt Brown? It was the combination of inverted triangle choke and straight armbar, I believe. Never seen that combination before.
Yeah, like I said, that's something I've hit several times in the gym, and I also had won the submission of the night a few times, several UFCs before that against a guy named Jason Gilliam with the same move. But yeah, and you know, I'd already fought Matt Brown once before that, not in the UFC, and got him with a one-arm guillotine. But here, you know, he had almost early in the first round, I tried a different submission, really slick one, and he countered it and got me in a Darce choke, and that's definitely the closest I've ever been to being submitted in a fight. He caught me really in a really good choke, and I was in big trouble. I just had to relax and try and keep his hips away from me, and I could tell he was really struggling because I could hear him breathing, and I just held it out until he couldn't hold his arms, couldn't hold it anymore, and then I got out. And so once I got on top and got that, I stepped over his head. I knew I got this reverse triangle choke. And then once I got that, I knew his head was lifted up, so he couldn't move, you know. And then once I got that, I go for the armbar. I'm going to get you with one of the two.
About Matt Serra, you avenged the loss. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Correct.
Well, considering the fact that he defeated you in your first fight, in your second fight, did you have a specific game plan for Matt Serra?
Yeah. You know, I know the first time I fought him, I felt like we were both a little tentative. Like we knew each other very well. We just trained together for 6 weeks, and we both wanted to win very bad. So neither one of us really opened up. We kind of was very defensive. So this time my strategy was to be as offensive as I can. Really try and work my stand-up. Don't worry about trying to go to the ground at all, and put on a good fight and try and knock his head off. You know, that was it. Worry about the takedowns, but come forward the entire time and throw hard punches. And so we both did that, and we put on a very entertaining fight.
About your last fight, many people were thinking that you're gonna lose to Dan Hardy. I think Dan Hardy was a favorite, right? Massive favorite, I think.
I don't remember how much, but yeah, he just came off, you know, losing, went the distance with George St. Pierre, you know, and I think he lost another one after that. So, yeah, I think people thought, you know, he was definitely on the ups. And so, and it kind of bothered me when people would say, oh, you're fighting Dan Hardy, you better try and take him down, you know, because he's really good on his feet. So I was thinking, well, what am I, terrible on my feet? I don't understand. Like, you don't think I'm as good as him on my feet? So that really bothered me. I was like, okay, I'm not going to try and take him down at all now. I'm going to try and prove to people that I'm better than him everywhere. And it was really good because I felt like, you know, we went in there and we hit each other really hard a couple of times. He rocked me, remember once, really good, but never tried to take him down. And then with about a minute to go in the fight, he shot it on me. And I didn't see that coming, but I was able to get a choke and submit him, so I was able to do what I wanted to with my stand-up, yet I still won by submission, so it was a good night.
About your Bkfc fights, I watched the ones against Drew Lipton and JC Damas. JC Damas was my guest too. Why did you decide to transition to bare knuckle, and what was the greatest bare knuckle fight for you? The hardest one? Who was the hardest opponent? And what is the major difference between bare knuckle and MMA?
Well, the reason I transitioned was, I wish it would have been around years early, but it wasn't. I didn't start doing any bare knuckle till I was in my mid-40s, and the reason that I did that was when you get older, it's very hard to continue to do MMA for physical reasons. Like I can go in and train really hard today, and I'll do well, but then if I try and come in tomorrow and train, my body will hurt. And if I try and do it 3 days in a row, I don't know if it'd be very, very difficult. Wrestling, jiu-jitsu, kickboxing, it just hurts the whole body. Now, when you do bare knuckle, it's only boxing, so much easier on your body physically to do. I could do that all day. I could do stand-up, but when you mix in the grappling and everything, so tough on the body. And that's why I think you're going to see a lot more the older MMA guys transition over to something like bare knuckle because they still have the desire and the ability to fight, but it's tough to do all the training that's required to do MMA unless you're going to take a lot of growth hormone or whatever illegal drugs, because that's why they do it, just because your body can't handle training that hard. So that's why I transitioned over, because it was just so much easier on the body. I also like the fact that it's going to sound crazy, but bare knuckle is much better for your brain, I would say, than regular boxing. Boxing, you take 20 shots to the head around, and every time that brain is hitting the skull, that can do damage. You don't get hit that many times in bare knuckle, so I think it's safer for your mind. It's probably worse for your face. You're going to get more superficial cuts, but it's not going to damage the brain as much. My toughest opponent was definitely Lamas, the guy you've already interviewed. I mean, he was extremely awkward, I would say, to fight, and difficult. He'd back up a lot. He'd back up, and then when I'd come forward, he'd come in with hard punches. Had a very good technique, and he was just tough. He'd never been knocked out. By the end of the fight, I never couldn't tell as much when you watch it as when I was actually in there. But I had him cut open a couple places. He was bleeding pretty good, but he never let it slow him down. He was in good shape, and he was a very tough and I would say awkward guy to fight.
How were you finding balance between family, job, training sessions? It was probably very hard, right?
Oh man, that was my hardest part, because I worked full time, 48 hours a week. I had 4 kids and a wife, and I was trying to train for UFC and whatnot. So most of the guys I fought didn't have any kids or any jobs, so all they had to do was train. For me to try and find time was kind of everything. I always felt like something wasn't getting the time that it deserved, because there's only 24 hours in a day. So I tried to find that balance, and I don't think I did it very well sometimes. So I felt like that was one of the reasons that led to me retiring at a time when I was still doing very well. I think I won 5 out of my last 6 fights, and I was doing fine, but I just wasn't being home enough with my kids. I had kids who were getting older, and it was time for me to spend some more time with them.
What would you say in general about your career? I mean, you had many different promotions, different fights. You adjusted so well. You adjusted so quickly. I mean, what was the key? What was the key? What was the secret?
I think that, luckily for me, when I talked about being a wrestler, and I've always had a good work ethic, and I worked as hard as I can. I'm not the strongest, I'm not the biggest or the fastest, but I try and work harder than everybody. But one thing I realized was, I did a couple things when I was wrestling that I didn't listen to coaches, and I did things it wasn't the smartest way. So I knew when I was fighting that I was going to do everything in my power to be successful, no matter what that meant. So I would have no problem, trying to go to bed early to get enough sleep, or try to eat right, when I had fights coming up. No alcohol, just dedicated as much as I can. I knew I was going to do everything I could to be successful because I never wanted to have that feeling that when I was done that I could have done more. As long as I did everything I could, I knew I was going to be happy when I was done. And I learned that from previous mistakes, from previously not feeling like that from wrestling. So, as long as you continue to learn from mistakes in your life, I think that's a positive thing. And I'd had something I'd already had a reference to, and I knew I would never do it again. So just made sure that every aspect of my life that I could think of that helped me get better at fighting, I was willing to do.
How does one day look like in your life right now?
What's that?
Can you please describe one day in your life right now?
Okay. Well, it kind of depends on the day, like today I got up and I went to the gym. I did some jiu-jitsu. Didn't do any boxing today. Now, I'm going to go back to the gym tonight. Tomorrow I will go to the fire department and I'll be there for 24 hours. The day after that, I have fights I'm help put on down in Lexington, Kentucky. So I'll drive for about 3 hours and help put on a different promotion. So I'm constantly busy. Free time in me or there's not a lot of it. People ask me if I like to go golfing. I never golf. Do you go hunting? I've never been hunting in my life. I don't really do anything besides, something with fighting, spend time with my family or some kind of training. So I know a lot of people think that doesn't sound like fun, but those are the things I like to do. So I'm fortunate I get to do things I like all the time. Sorry about that. That was my new big dog knocked my phone out of my hand. So, but I'm fortunate to get to do things I like all the time. It's very time consuming sometimes and very tough on my body and my family, I'm sure, but I'm fortunate.
Would you like to greet someone? Would you like maybe to give a shout out to somebody? Do you have some message for the fans maybe?
My message for the fans are, if you want to, please pay attention to what we're doing with that Bkfc, the fighting. I'm one of the commentators now for the bare knuckle. It's a very exciting sport. I love watching it. I enjoy doing it. Like I said, I wish I was a little younger when it was first out and I would have been doing more of it. So please check out the Bkfc, probably the cheapest thing you could be watching right now because you get it's like $5 a month and you get all the fights. It's unbelievably cheap. So that another thing I'm putting on my own fight with the B2 fighting series, which is another one trying to get guys into the UFC. We've been very successful with that. More the Midwest and the South in the United States. Yeah, man, really enjoying watching some of these thriller fights with some of the older guys coming back and doing some boxing type things. So I'm kind of liking watching that. So I'm just a big fight fan, and I love anything involved with it.
Thank you so much for the interview, Chris. I will put the video to creation now. Hope in like few hours I will release it. Thank you so much. It's always a huge pleasure to have a legend in your show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
All right. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.